Hello everyone, welcome to today's HR Leaders Live. My name is Chris Rainey, co-founder here at HR Leaders, and I'll be your host for today's session. We're super excited to have you all with us for today's panel discussion, which is the first in a 4-part series where we will be introducing the concept of global fluency, which is a framework for achieving and sustaining success in today's ever-changing economy. Before we jump in, please take a moment in the chat to introduce yourselves to each other. Also make sure you hit the follow button on the top right hand side, and that way you'll be notified on the next session so you don't miss out. If you can't join us live, we'll also be sent on demand recording, so make sure you hit that throughout today's show. Before we jump in, I want to introduce today's panelists, where we'll be talking about how to build a talent acquisition strategy that accelerates expansion into new markets. To answer this question, I'm joined by Brian Dames, Chief Strategy Officer at Safeguard Global, Jeanette Winters, who's a Fortune 100 talent executive, former CHRO and managing partner at Winters Advisory Group, James Cheng, Global Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and Interim Head of Talent Acquisition at Zimmer Biomet, Pete Tiliakos, who's the Principal Analyst at NelsonHall, Elke Manjet, Global Head of Talent Acquisition at SAP, James Baker, Global Head of Talent Acquisition at Jaguar Land Rover, and last but not least, Christine Regno, Global Head of Talent Acquisition at Power Corporation. I think I need to take a breath after that. Introduction, everyone. How is everyone?
Great.
Great. Thanks for having us.
I took a breath and I realized that halfway through I'm going to have to take another breath at some point as well. But thank you all for joining us for today's panel discussion. Great to have. For those that are new to this, welcome to our crazy world of HR leaders that we are. Before we jump in, I'm going to pick on Brian for a second. Brian, it'd be great for you to introduce the concept of global fluency for everyone. What is it, and why is it so important in today's global economy?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think it makes sense to talk a little bit about the context for global fluency. So Safeguard Global has over a decade of experience working with multinationals, and we work with multinationals of all sizes, different industries, entering and working in different countries. And inevitably, in those engagements over that time, we consistently get the same one question over and over again. And that is, how do we stack up? So our clients are always interested in benchmarking their performance as a multinational against their peer group, whether that be peers of the same company size, the same evolution of growth, the same industry. And we've done our best to answer that question. We have all kinds of subject matter experts that are with the company that answer that on an anecdotal basis. Obviously, we can't share anything specific to any client, but we have lots of people that have lots of great experience that do their best to answer that question and give our clients an idea of where they are, compared to that benchmark. And we sort of put our heads together and said, gosh, there must be a better way that we can systematically answer this question for our clients. So we kind of put our heads together and took our best and brightest, and we thought through what are the attributes that actually contribute to optimal success for a multinational, whether it's entering a new market like we're going to talk about today through talent acquisition, whether it's engaging global teams and managing voluntary attrition, whether it's the operational side of managing those teams. There must be a way that we can get more quantifiable on exactly what those contributing attributes are. So we engaged in a pretty extensive set of research. We built a hypothesis as to, based on our experience, what we thought contributed. And then we interviewed 200 multinational companies, really all different geographic locations, different size companies, because we know that growing globally is accessible to companies of all sizes now, different industries, and then did some supplemental research looking at best-in-class companies, so we could sort of compare and contrast, what were the contributing factors for those companies that were kind of had built a competitive advantage. And really what it came down to is 3 main components. And the first is what I think of as knowledge. So as we all know, and we'll talk about this today, I'm sure, it is really hard to enter a new market globally. And it's really hard for companies that are managing a workforce across multiple countries. You have the complexity of different languages to deal with, different currencies. Obviously, the employment laws are very different by company and region. The tax regulations that you have to work with. So, and all of that information is sort of it's amorphous. So it's always changing, and there's always updates. We were just talking before we went live about some new regulations that we're having to deal with in the U.S. Around diversity. So, you know, that's a very difficult thing to manage, and that knowledge is most important to keep close in the organization. So, the proximity and how well that's institutionalized within a multinational is directly correlated to the success and how they sort of deploy and manage global teams. So that component, that knowledge, we sort of call intellect. So what's the intellect for a multinational, and knowing what markets they're in, and then what their options are globally for new markets, which we'll talk about today. The second thing is, the first thing is knowledge. The second thing is sort of know-how. So all the things I talked about, whether it's, you know, regulatory information or tax information, that all manifests itself in the production of different data, and that data, as I said, is updated and constantly changing. So really, the skill of the organization to be able to connect that data, to normalize it, so it can actually be viewed in a common way, because we have all these different countries that multinationals are dealing with, and then distribute that to all of the stakeholders within the organization to need to have that information. So the proficiency of a company to have know-how in the way that they interact with that data and distribute it within their organization, that's the second component. So it's sort of the first being knowledge or intellect, the second being sort of know-how, or what we call acumen. And then the third is, once, you know, that data is distributed, we're obviously dealing with all kinds of market trends and shifts that are taking place all the time. So whether that's within an individual market where a talent pool has recognized its own value, and you know, labor costs are going up in a market, and multinationals as an organization have to react to that, or it's the biggest global event that we've seen in our time that we have to react to, that I'm sure we'll talk about, like COVID. Companies have to react. They have to be nimble in the way that they react to trends and shifts that are taking place in the market, and often you have to decision off the data that's available to you as an organization, and react and protect the business, or you know, help the business thrive. So that third component is what we call agility. So the ability for an organization, a multinational organization, to react to the trends that are taking place. So collectively, those three components are what we call global fluency, and we're really excited about that concept, because whether you decide to work with us as a company or not, really what we want to do is share our knowledge, put it in a nice package, and really help all boats rise, and be able to have a sense of what your proficiency is as a multinational against the market. And I know, Pete, you're familiar with this concept. We've worked on it together. I think it's applicable to the subject of today's panel discussion. I wonder if you could share a little more color on your thoughts on what we've built.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. I'm a big fan of the concept. I mean, obviously, it provides a tremendous framework for the kind of attributes I think your modern growth-oriented firms need to be aspiring to attain. The way I like to think of it is, we see a ton of emphasis on reskilling workers for the future, but I think multinational firms could really benefit from reskilling as an org around these types of agile capabilities. So I like to think of global fluency as a skill set that multinational organizations need to develop in order to be more competitive, and thrive as a globally focused firm. So yeah, I'm definitely a fan.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for the introduction, Brian. Done a lot better job than I would have on that, and Pete as well. I appreciate that. I'm gonna pick on my good friend. Who's like on first? James. As always, pick on you. You knew it was coming, James. First and foremost, this talent acquisition piece is something that you've taken on as in addition to your role as leading the diversity and inclusion area in the business. So I don't know how you manage both roles, first and foremost, but I'd be super interested to know from your perspective, what are the key challenges that the business is facing at the moment, especially now with everyone being remote, and what is the kind of some of the projects you're working on with the team?
Well, as we think about how COVID-19 has forced us to take a hard look of how we operate in the world now, requiring virtual workplaces, It gave not just my company, but many other organizations opportunity to pivot, challenge leaders to realize the necessity for face-to-face is actually just a bias. With this comes opportunity to tackle the challenges of operating in an environment where we must meet our commitments to our patients, clients, and shareholders' expectations through innovation. It offers a path for us to tackle such challenges and innovation through diversity of experiences, perceptions, thoughts, and ideas driven by people. Now, more than ever, we have to harness top talent from globally diverse backgrounds to help us innovate. So with that, a strong virtual workplace experience and environment helps us move forward. It becomes a key differentiator for companies to attract top talent that may have been inaccessible due to geographical locations. It is now a value proposition. And that's how we are looking at it from our approach from talent acquisition, as well as how we find talent now. Because again, many times we think of it from a geographical location as the limiter.
And feel free to jump in, guys, whenever you want. Don't wait for me. I can see Elke, you want to jump in there. I can see you're eager.
Yeah. Okay. Good reading here. Yeah, absolutely. So I would fully echo what James said. We do realize that in interaction with talent, that there is a request actually out there for full virtual work by many talents that we're interacting with, and that don't understand any longer why they would be linked to a certain location to do their work. We've all learned throughout the last few years that we can be impactful as individuals and as teams by doing it totally virtual, right? So that is something that everybody realizes that talents are requesting, and we as a company as well need to rethink what location strategy, which has always been an important topic for us, means going forward, and it will clearly mean something different. And while we always had policies to allow flexible work and remote work, definitely the situation we're in today pushes those on a totally different level that I guess we couldn't imagine just a few months back.
So, Elke and James, I have a question. It's hard enough when you're dealing with talent pools and all these different markets, and what those different countries or regions value from an employment standpoint may or likely is very different. And then you have this major shift like COVID come in, which completely disrupts everything you thought you knew about those markets. I wonder how, because as I talked about in Fluency, we talked about this idea of knowledge, intellect, how you keep close proximity to those kinds of changes. Like how is the value system of these different talent pools within these different countries shifted and changed, and how do you know that it changed and what those changes are?
I would say definitely in the space of trusting your local leaders. One of the biggest part about this is knowing when and how you tap into your local leaders of the region and being able to have them scope out and understand what their talent within their direct organization, their location, and otherwise. Because one of the big things that we have a tendency of doing as many companies do, we tend to have a central model. We have a central approach. And when you think about regional nuances and talent being a central nuance to the region, we don't always empower that. We don't actually always make sure to look and consider the diversity of that region. So one, when you're thinking about pipelining your talent from external, from a hiring perspective, knowing that we're going after an objective, which is what we're trying to do is innovate so we can survive. The other part is, are you truly managing your talent from within? Are you seeing where talent's coming from? Are you tracking your talent? What is your process in doing so? And primarily, are you actually developing and retaining them through that? Does that answer it?
What's interesting about what you said, sorry, one quick jump in, Chris, and then we can move on.
No, keep going. I'm enjoying
I just had a data point that's relevant that I thought might be interesting based on what James just said. 14% of multinationals, 14% of multinationals have local market expertise for all of the countries that they're in. That was shockingly low. We would have thought that number would have been in the 50% range. And James, you just highlighted a perfect example why the proximity of that data and having that institutional knowledge within your organization is so important, because as those shifts take place, you can react to them more quickly. So, and we've seen that in the data. So there is an opportunity for competitive advantage. The more institutional knowledge you have, the closer you are to the market within your own four walls. Then, and then it's sort of, it diminishes if it's within one partner or multiple partners, or it's spread around the world. We see that the proficiency and the knowledge actually decreases.
Yeah,
that number is pretty impressive. Brian, would love to understand how my company is rated there, honestly. But if I might quickly react to the comment, so we're constantly gathering feedback from our candidates. We've implemented a Qualtrics survey last year to get feedback at every step of the process of their interaction with us, where they as well tell us about some of their preferences, obviously what they like, what they don't like. So that's a good source to continuously learn and as well realize changes. But as well, we are making sure that we are learning from those who join us, right, and look at them as a feedback source continuously. And last but not least, through your people surveys, you get the pulse on the ground across the globe. But to James' point, I think it is really important to stay close to the local leaders, to engage with the local teams more than ever, actually, right? Because things are changing so dynamically. So just relying on any official sources, researches might not always be your most agile way of reacting. And one more thought there, and then I let you jump in, James. What was interesting for us to see as we shifted to this totally remote hiring and interviewing approach, and again, we've changed our survey to get feedback on how candidates do like that. It was interesting to see actually a big commonality basically around the globe, and we're operating in 160 countries, which is there was first a slight dip in experience, but then after a few weeks, everybody seems to have settled into that and got comfortable with it, and then experience levels went up again pretty consistently across the globe. So I think there's many differences, but I tend to as well make sure we're looking for the commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would love to jump in as well if I can. So I would echo all of that. So about 2/3 of our company is outside the US, and we do get a lot of feedback that we focus solely on the US and we don't take the insights at the local level. So we have really been trying to build that into our talent attraction strategy. And we just worked with Addison Whitney to create our first associate value proposition in 80 years. We've never done this. And so we worked hard. This was even during the pandemic and pre-pandemic to really gather the insights at the local level. We conducted focus groups across APAC, LATAM, Americas, EMEA, and really made sure that we had the authentic voice of the associate so that we could build that into an effective value proposition. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from internal as well as external candidates just on the power of this messaging. And I think, in the state of affairs that we're in right now, with everything being virtual and remote, if you're not authentic, if you don't have that authentic voice of the associate, it's not going to be believable, and people are going to really struggle to connect with your company. So that's one step we've taken to really gather those insights locally.
James, I'm going to jump in so you get a chance.
No, I'm
waiting.
kind of agreeing with a lot of what's being
and Elke and James.
Yeah, I'm just agreeing with what's being said. I mean, I work in a very diverse business. We've got parts of our business which are kind of, artificial intelligence, software engineering, and then we've got parts of our business which are, manufacturing sites. And the impact of something like COVID affects those different areas very differently. So, segmenting your data and insights and your approach for those different populations is really important. But I would echo the sentiment that COVID presents a great opportunity to evolve our approach to workforce experience, and that's something we're looking at in great detail. And I think certainly as someone running a TA function, I've been talking about it needs to be digital. That's the nature of consumer experience. But of course, now I've kind of got this paradox where you've got this massive kind of digital acceleration from COVID. But then simultaneously trying to kind of get the investment, right, to upgrade your systems and processes to deliver, something as good as an Amazon or whatever, at the same time as this big kind of commercial crisis is a really kind of interesting challenge to wrestle with. So actually, we're doing some work with SAP at the moment. We run SAP SuccessFactors. So I know some of your guys.
Fantastic. Jeanette, I want to jump to yourself for a second. I see you've been sitting there nodding away at all the feedback from everyone.
Chris, the thing that really strikes me is that with COVID and being remanded to work from home, now suddenly we all have a common experience that is unique. And so instead of all going to offices and affiliating geographically with a building or a campus, even for the larger organizations, now we're sitting in our bedrooms, our kitchens, our dining rooms, our offices at home, and all of us are doing that. And so that gives us the opportunity to look at a different common denominator that is home office, that working from home as opposed to working from within. And, Brian's 3 attributes really resonate. It's that proximity of knowledge and understanding what the unique attributes of working at home really mean to both candidates and to current employees. So it really is quite interesting. Massive explosion of growth and change in industries, and then we have people suddenly working from home. It is really different. But now 7 months into this, I'm not sure any of us would even really think about what it used to be in January and February.
Yeah.
Yeah. James, I was wondering from your perspective if you could share some of the insights that you're gathering around recruitment and hiring at the moment.
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, clearly we're, what I tend to be interested in is how does recruitment link to organizational outcomes that have an impact on enterprise value? So clearly, are you hiring people that you're retaining is a pretty important question, because if you're not, the cost of retention is 2 times the cost of recruiting. Are the people that you're recruiting high performers? If you're hiring leaders in particular, are you hiring leaders that are helping you fix the things that you're trying to fix from an organizational effectiveness standpoint? And I think that for me is really where HR needs to go. It's I think it used to be a discipline very, very focused on people and cost, but really where we need to take the debate is how does HR affect the bottom line of the business? How do we think about what HR is trying to deliver as a capability? Because I'll give you an example of I'll give you an example of recruitment. We used to think about recruitment as a team of recruiters, whereas these days I think we would all recognize as professionals in our function that actually it is a capability that represents an interplay between technology, people, and process, and that's a mindset shift. Equally, if I took manufacturing as an example, manufacturing used to be, a fairly mechanical factory with a lot of people doing manual processes, whereas now it's typically a bunch of robots, with a very, very complex AI-enabled supply chain. And equally, do you need to build a factory, or can you license the manufacturing, or are you going to be like ARM and you just create the IP? And I think having these, walking into the space where the conversations that you're having are, what is the investment rate of return on this? Does it make more sense to make or buy, for this proposition? And I think, when we talked about kind of talent market entry, you kind of need to walk back into your problem statement. Why are you doing it? You know, are you doing it because it's a manufacturing site and your ambition is to reduce labor cost, or are you doing it because actually that means there's some kind of a regulatory change and your cost of parts are going to be clearer, and you need to walk through normally quite a complex multifaceted set of criteria, which in my experience often change right as you're talking about it. So when we've done these type of things, we've actually almost kind of built a computer, right, which had these different attributes that you can then fire into, which says, right, okay, well, if that's the most important thing you want to do, if that's why you're going to that market, does it make the most sense to do that, or are we better off doing something else? But that is quite a complex and forensic process. To Brian's point, do you have the capability to do that? And in my experience, actually, it's the best thing to do is try and get a cross-functional team of experts from different areas to really kind of look at that problem in detail.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And what's interesting is when we think about agility, which is the third kind of component in global fluency, it's the sort of value add use of the data, and that could be through kind of operational reporting, it could be through more advanced reporting, and then it sort of ladders up to advanced analytics. And what we've seen in the data is for companies that have high agility, so they're decisioning on data, they have pretty sophisticated analytic capabilities that allow them to tie what they're doing to value, which is what you were describing, that there are really interesting outcomes. So there are the reduction of voluntary attrition and the things you would expect from like a talent perspective. But also what we've seen is HR organizations that had a high rate of voluntary attrition within their own group. And by increasing the sophistication of the approach and the way that they run the function, they were actually able to reduce attrition within their own function. So, we've seen cases where within the HR organization, they went from a 30% voluntary attrition to under 5% because people wanted to work in a more strategic way. And then also, and this is a little bit of a softer benefit, but change the internal brand of the organization. So all of you as talent acquisition experts, you don't want to be just a tactical arm of the organization that goes out and finds people and hires them. You want to add strategic value to your organization. So the more you're able to interrogate data, analyze it, and tie it to value for the organization, the more of a strategic partner you are to the business functions that you support.
Yeah.
And that to us describes high agility.
Yeah, it's I think the challenge in my experience is getting some of the things that Elke was talking about. So not only Elke, but EVP, in a competitive price point on pay. The culture you're going to create, if it's different, if it needs to be different because it's a different type of capability, into that debate at the beginning, recognizing if you get it wrong, you can attract the talent, but they're not going to stay, and actually it's all going to be a false economy. And it's that long-term thinking versus the short-term focus on let's just go, it's cost base, that you kind of really need to, it takes the time and then energy to introduce that. And that's kind of understandable because I sort of understand the whole kind of, experiment, cheaply kind of mindset. But sometimes, experimenting cheaply is actually more expensive in the long term.
Yeah, so if I might jump on that, because that's a big topic for us as a company, but as well in TA. And what I've seen throughout the last few months, and the change that I'm driving with my team as well, is really getting in front of the business at a very, very early stage as they are discussing these strategic decisions on where to invest, where to potentially de-invest, how to their ability to reassign talent to needs that are upcoming pretty dynamically. And in that context, we've shaped the talent intelligence function just recently, and many other companies have that potentially already. But we've seen the impact of that very fast because the business is so grateful for providing them data that goes beyond the narrow, is the talent there and what does the talent cost, but even looking at macroeconomic societal trends of age in a society, diversity populations in a society, our governments investing in education programs in certain areas. So those are all things that help you form an opinion and shape a view on where you are investing long term, because to your point, James, going where the talent might be cheap right now and taking that as the only criteria might pay back much more expensive. So yeah, it's a pretty sophisticated art to get all the dots together and connect them to a picture that is valuable to the business to take their decisions. But I think at the same time, it's an amazing opportunity for us as a function to be at that stage with the business and be part of their planning and their decision making, and be far ahead of what talent pools you are supposed to build versus that tactical arm that I guess to some extent we're all coming from, and we've all been a few years back.
Yeah, and Elke, for what it's worth, we see 60% of multinationals do not make regular use of advanced analytics. Mm-hmm. So, what you're doing is already ahead of the curve. And this, James, to your point, I think if we think about how we gain in proficiency in these different areas, you literally, as a function, can be building competitive advantage. And that's how you kind of uplift the strategic value that you and your function provide to the company.
Yeah, it's really cool. One of my sort of belief systems, if it's not a competitive advantage, it's kind of a disadvantage, right? So if you can't, HR has to be delivering a competitive advantage, and if you can look at your HR strategy and it's not, then it's not a very good strategy.
Right.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you on that.
I actually would love to jump in one little tiny detail, and this is something that we hear a lot about, is the weight of it being on HR or talent acquisition for that matter. This is a matter that needs to be all leaders in the business is responsible. Mm-hmm. So that thought process that yes, we need to bring the value, but they also need to see the value and own that value, because they're the one who has to execute that on a daily basis. So helping business leaders understand the full cycle of what your talent brings is going to be important, from whether before they even start thinking of a person to hire, is thinking about how does people drive your outcomes, not just what is the numbers. So that's one of the
I would fully agree to that, and I guess that drags into the conversation of future skills and what will you need to deliver the outcomes or to shape a successful business in the long run, right? And that's a big topic for us in terms of, first of all, understanding what skills our employees have to a good depth and detail, and then taking those development or acquiring decisions. It's a hot topic for us for sure.
Jeanette, I'm wondering, from your perspective as a former CHRO in many organizations and obviously around the work that you do, what are some of the frameworks and capabilities do you think HR needs to support the organization and pivot in response to all of these changes?
Starting with aligning the business strategy and talent strategies, they really cannot be separated. And it's not, we're going to go, and Elke said it so well, we've got to get out in front and be upfront with the strategy alignment, knowing where we're going and why. And, James, one of the things that we see with our clients is that distribution of product is also another reason why you may expand into a geography, but you need to understand why you're going somewhere. And then looking at that triangle of forces, it's the environment and what's happening, label that COVID for many of us today, but each environment has its own unique way of dealing with those stresses and strains. Another angle is the the externalities, what are happening not only within the company, but outside and in the various communities. One of the things we see in the greater San Francisco area is that people in tech are leaving in droves. In fact, there's been a decline of about 10% of people that have actually just hightailed it out. They can work remotely. Their companies have committed to letting them work remotely for at least a year. So they're saying, I'm going to go to Idaho or South Carolina or anywhere else where they may have friends, family, or just a yearning to be. So it's really understanding what's happening, not only in the geography, but the externality where each of us actually sit. And then the third is looking at the relationships. And each of you have mentioned this idea of getting the business connected to HR. In my mind, if the business doesn't think of us as part of them almost seamlessly, then we're not deep enough into their knickers that we're going to have that alignment. And so it's that triad: environment, externalities, and relationships. There's really 4 parts when you're building a new team somewhere. There's the job and what skills that you need to have people come with. What's the hiring manager really expecting? And then looking at what the team is going to do and what they need to be and contribute. And finally, the culture. We need to remember Patrick Lencioni's admonition that teams have their own culture separate and apart from organizations. And so it's not just the big, multinational we have to worry about, but it may be geographically specific as well. So those are the 2 models we really work with most clearly today.
Mm-hmm.
Love that point you made about the talent leaving the Bay. We're seeing it in London. We're seeing it in New York. It's almost like ghost towns, and people are like, why do I want to go back? I had to work in New York. I didn't choose to work there. Same with a lot of my friends that were working in the city here in the UK. Now they're experienced working from home. I know so many that are just not going back, and they're figuring out, where am I going to move to? Where am I going to work from? And that's completely changed the dynamic.
And what's fascinating about that to me is how presumptive that is, right? So the workforce is effectively making a choice about how they're going to engage at work without really checking with the employer. We're seeing, as you said, we're seeing the trends in all these different metro areas. That's a very permanent decision for a lot of people, obviously. And a lot of these companies haven't necessarily declared exactly what the employee engagement model is going to look like in the future, but yet they're still making those decisions, and that's really interesting to me.
I think most of them have declared, many of the situations I speak to every day have declared policies around it, as long as it's in the same country. Obviously, for tax purposes, if you then have employees moving across different countries and regions, then it gets super complicated. So I think many have kind of declared in the same country. We don't mind where you work from in the same country, but I think when you take it a step outside of that, working, then it just, from a tax position, is a nightmare as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a place where companies could get out ahead of that a little bit more. We know it's happening, so why aren't we responding with some sort of, here's the workforce of the future, here's how we can support you through this transition period. We don't want to lose good talent, so they're going to find other alternatives. I mean, there's other companies that are saying you can work from anywhere. Siemens, other places are publicizing this. So I think for us, we are opening up the doors internally to say, if you're in EMEA or the US, you can work from either of those places. We're opening up some of our jobs to either of those locations. It's a little bit more difficult with APAC because of the time zone. But I think we have to get clear at the organization and the talent and the business processes to say what can we support. And then also for us, we're saving so much money with not relocating people across the globe. That's a reinvestment back into the people and the talent and the business. So how can we tie that back to the strategy, I think is really critical for us to bring, our perspectives and have that seat at the table.
Out of interest, one of the things we see is that commercial real estate is going through a real metamorphosis. REI built a beautiful campus in the Northwest, and they finished it and then didn't move into it because they said, well, we found we really don't need an HQ of that size or complexity, so it's on the market for sale. And I think some of the companies are taking and looking at geography and location in a very different way. And we've known for over a decade, if you try to recruit from some certain universities in the US in particular that have particular emphasis or programs, there are just some places students aren't going to leave. They like the geography, they want to stay there. Well, now we can accommodate that more readily. Even some of our more reticent colleagues are saying, everybody's working from home, I guess we'll just have to get used to this. But think of the things to, people aren't spending an hour or two a day commuting, never mind the expense. Just think of the time that is saved and the energy and the ability to not have that sink, both emotionally and from, the minutes in the day. It really has a lot of positive attributes. But then this is a cataclysmic, sort of issue that's going to come to bear. A couple of very large companies, including Twitter, have said, well, if you move to a lower cost geography, we're going to dock your pay because suddenly you're not living in a higher cost geography. So the question is, does that make sense? It must for Twitter, but I think each of us have to decide whether or not that's going to work for our environment and with our employees.
So Pete, you have a more macro view just because of all the companies that you deal with on a daily, weekly basis.
Yep.
What are you seeing from a trend perspective?
Yeah, you mean from the work from home?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what we definitely see is that work from home sort of trend is now becoming the work from anywhere norm, right? And it is creating some challenges, like you said, the location costs. I mean, I personally don't think if a job warrants being paid something, where you live shouldn't matter. It should be the skill set that you're being paid for. So I think there's a lot of challenges that are going to come from this, but I think it is all of the things that you've talked about are spot on. Folks are rethinking their location, their investments in buildings, and I think it's also spiking a need to modernize infrastructure to be able to get their hands around this and be able to support it from not just an employee experience from a technical perspective, but how do you engage and keep the work meaningful and keep people focused when they're not in an office and they're not sitting down maybe across from their manager every day. Those are all the things I think that are creating angst, and certainly technology is helping, but there's a lot of process and specifics to their culture that have to be thought about when they're making these decisions.
Yeah, on the flip side to that, I've heard Amazon is buying up more office space, and Workday wants to get people back to the office as quickly as possible to build those cultures. So I do wonder, are you going to see kind of the pendulum swing back and we'll go back to normal because productivity loss, because of all the compensation differences, and it's a lot of challenges to kind of resolve. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, it's so conflicting because every other CHRO I'm speaking to has a completely different view. One's like, we're getting everyone back in the office. The other's like, no, it's completely remote. And it's an interesting time if you're looking for a job as well. That whole experience. Go on, James.
I mean, I think I think the challenge at the moment, right? We like most of us, we do a lot of work with data, right? And one of the things that we're very aware of is because of this big shift to digital, it's kind of everyone's going after the same talent, right? The critical skills list is very, very common across a number of organizations. And, when you've got the kind of big tech companies saying, right, everyone can work from home, then actually, that kind of flexible working policy just becomes required. You're just going to not competitive unless you're offering that. And I wonder how much you can unwind that actually, because those are very often some of the skills you probably can do on a laptop at home. And it's fascinating to see kind of how our kind of work culture's evolving. So agile's a big thing now, where you're kind of working in sprints and stuff like that. And you can kind of do it remotely. It's okay, but it does require shift in how you work together, and you know, I'll confess I'm still learning that. You know, I had a great moment when I had a chat with one of my team, and she's like, "Oh, I'm in Scotland right now." I'm like, "Okay." He's not based in Scotland, and of course it made no difference at all.
So James,
yeah, if I might jump on that, I personally don't think we will see something like a way back totally to where we've been before COVID. I can't believe that's happening, as well, due to the point, James, that you just raised. Talent has choices, because we're all looking for, to some extent, the same skills, and the pool will not increase short term. There is no reason for that to happen. So what that imposes, I think, very much is how are you building a culture, and how are you leading people in such an environment that might be totally remote or mixed remote and presence, which probably is where we will be landing, to give as well people choices, because we have those employees who simply love to be in the office, or their environment at home is not very suited to do concentrated work. That's there as well, right? So we will have that mixed world, I believe, and what we've tried to take care of very much in the last few months, more than ever before, is be close to the employees, find those opportunities to connect beyond just the narrow scope of the work, so to say, to really make sure we're bringing across the message of care and connection, to a big extent, and make sure people still feel part of that bigger thing, despite the fact that they might feel sitting alone at home, and not part of their team as usual, and running into people when they grab a coffee, and so on and so forth. So that's quite a change, and we've seen people reacted very differently to it, and I think as leaders we're really asked to be super flexible and much more conscious in terms of the needs of our employees on that angle.
So interesting question. When I hear how some of you are thinking about talent, especially in this new paradigm, part of what we do is help companies employ in markets that they're not in, or they want to test, or set up an operation, and we have not seen any slow in that activity whatsoever. And James, it sparked something you said, just your reliance on data. And it's just amazing how the accessibility of the data associated with the market that a multinational wants to be in, and then everything can be done virtually for them to enter that market. It makes me wonder, are any of you seeing a slowdown in how much activity you are in entering new markets from a business and talent perspective, or is that picking back up? I just wonder what the effect has been for you, because we haven't seen any slowdown at all, which is kind of shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the rationale is different, right? So the global economy, I think it's fair to say, is not growing right now. So, whereas activity historically would have been increasing capacity, going into new markets, it also depends what phase a company is in, right? If you're a startup, you've got a hot product, then of course that can be growth led. I suspect what's going on in a lot of organizations right now, I'll choose my words carefully, is people are looking at cost-driven strategies, right? So, does it make sense to look at how you can deliver that capability in a more efficient way? And I would have thought that might account, if your growth activity has come down, that kind of activity, I suspect, has gone up. And equally, we're talking about the interplay of technology and people. You're also sort of saying, okay, how can you look at a capability and use something like robotic process automation to do that more reliably, more efficiently, and more cheaply, and redeploy those people assets into high value and probably more satisfying tasks.
Yeah, and I would add there, we are definitely seeing an expansion across some of our opcos that are directly involved in the fight of COVID. So we are expanding our manufacturing capability to help with the ventilators and the vaccine. And, that's definitely a growth engine. And some of the other segments of our business, like aerospace, oil and gas, obviously those are down. So we're seeing a retraction, but it's definitely offset with the, growth in the other business areas.
That makes sense.
I think a lot of companies are also reevaluating their supply chain fragility. And I think here in the United States, domestically, we saw that when we had reliance in certain geographies for piece parts or, trade agreements, and then politics overlays on that, and then COVID overlays on that as well. That things that we just assume that we're going to get things from Mexico or China or wherever, and suddenly we don't have ready access to that. And I think that's one of the things that companies are really being forced to take a look at, to make sure that if your routine channels of whether it's consumables or even finished goods is challenged, what's your alternative? Because people will get it somewhere. And then the question is, are you prepared to be agile enough that if you need to turn on a dime, that you've got a flexible supply chain underneath you and around you to support that?
Yeah. And picking back on that, I would say not just from a product perspective, but when you also think from a people perspective. Right now, with limitations of people crossing borders, yes, with the restriction of COVID, we have to identify talent and pipeline talent across multiple geographies for the sake of being able to tackle challenges within regions. So when we think about it, as leaders have to consider from being an inclusive leader in looking for the future, are we truly tapping into the market intelligence of people in their geography as we bring it all back to fundamentally, the economy is based on people. So having the right people in the right place at the right time is what drives innovation in any organization.
James, I'm wondering, whilst I've got your whilst you're on the roll, how are you making sure people feel included? Especially when everyone's remote now, how are you making sure? And I'd love to hear from everyone actually, how you're making sure you can embed people in the culture of your organization, make people feel included when we're so far apart and remote, especially on a video call. It's hard to really get everyone and making sure everyone has room to actually talk and share their insights and value. So I wonder if there's any advice for anyone around that and how you're making sure people feel included whilst we're working remote.
So one of the things that as I'm thinking about how we are considering developing our leaders, as most commonly said, people leave not companies, but their managers, right? So how will we make sure we're equipping our actual leaders to create an inclusive environment, whether you're in person or not? Let's consider this before. Before there was WebEx, there was phones. Before there was phones, there was multiple ways of communicating. It was just, how were you approached? So are you teaching your leaders to be inclusive, authentic, and be approachable whether you're digital or not? Because a true leader can lead anywhere and everywhere, even by a term of a statement, let alone being a conversation. So one, equipping our leaders to truly be inclusive where and whenever, however.
Love it.
I have to say I'm cautiously optimistic about COVID. I think it's done a tremendous job in bringing out the need for compassion and for heart in society, recognizing that actually, we're not independent. The world is interconnected. Organizations are interconnected, and certainly from what I've seen, that's been a wonderful blossoming, and I think I'm sure we're not alone. I think the attention that employees are placing because of COVID on listening to their people, understanding how something this traumatic is affecting them, is really a really important shift, right? Because leadership is often thought of as a hierarchical notion, right? Well, that's just a belief system. It's actually a social process, And effective leadership is a social process involving everybody. And if organizations are compassionately listening to their people and saying, look, is this working for you? Then that's actually really encouraging.
Yeah, and I would definitely add that we have spent a lot more time having those personal dialogues with associates. So whether it's through fireside chats, whether it's through videos, we've had a lot more vulnerability sharing of our leaders, especially those with different race and ethnicities, and how this has impacted them. It's really, I think, opened the door to share your personal life. There's not really that intersection or separation anymore of work and personal, which has been, I think, empowering for associates to bring their authentic self to work. We also talk a lot about psychological safety, and that's something we're really educating our leaders on, how to build that with your teams. It doesn't always come naturally to people, so I do think it requires a little more training, education, understanding, and compassion for sure.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it interesting that it took us being pulled so far apart to bring us so close together? I always say I've been saying to my team members recently, I feel like with the bond we have together, even though we've been away from each other, has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger during this period. And it took something like COVID and us being pulled away from an office environment, and no one's immune to this. So I've seen a few headlines, COVID is the great equalizer. I've seen that a few times over the past few months, and it's true. And we've all kind of bonded around that, although we're not close to each other. And there's something super interesting about that. I do hope it continues throughout all of this as well.
Chris, 2 comments on that. I think, and one's a caution for all of us in the field of human capital, is that the reliance on human resources has increased substantially in us providing solutions of whatever sort. And I think we need to be really careful about self-care and making sure that we're being attentive, that the day is long, it's longer than it ever was, even if we're not commuting, and that it's stressful because you're beginning to hear the personal side, as Christy has said. Your personal life is now a part. The kids being at home schooling, college students being at home, your spouse being at home. The second thing is the reliance on leaders. Now, suddenly they've got to be, their emotional intelligence is front and center. And we have to rely on them. They need to be out and connecting because just as, there is a leader on every call and somebody that is driving the agenda, perhaps that takes a lot more than a leader showing up going, yeah, take the vote and walk out. Leadership can't be checking in and showing up anymore. And that's something that I think we all need to be really, really concerned about.
Well, conscious of time now. I can't believe an hour's already gone that quickly. But before we wrap up, as we move into 2021, I don't think anyone really knows where we're going to be, what's going to be happening around that. I'm not going to ask you to get your crystal ball out, Brian. But from your perspective, what kind of workforce data does HR and organizations need at their fingertips to make decisions as we move into 2021?
Yeah, so and first, before I answer that, I want to thank the panel. I mean, I'm humbled by the insights and the eloquence. I feel like I could do this for 2 more hours. So thank you, everybody, for your thoughts. To me, I think it's a lot of the attributes that we talked about when I introduced Global Fluency. There's so many shifts that are taking place at the local level, even without something like the overlap of COVID. We have to be conscious of what the talent base values, the regulatory shifts. There's cultural issues and political and social climate. Those are all data that are important, and to me, it is about what data is relevant as you think about entering different markets and kind of running the business, but it's the marrying of that information and what's happening in the market with the needs of the company. So as we talked about, there's a business strategy for the company. You're trying to achieve things, whether you're entering markets or you're actually exiting, or whatever the strategy of the business is, it's important that there's sort of connective tissue between that and all those dynamics that are taking place. And then we've got this overlay of COVID on top of it. So to me, it's about, you know, that the connection of that data and normalization of it, because it comes in so many different forms across so many different countries and regions, and coalescing it and making good decisions. So again, thank you for participating. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is just one of 4. So I can get everyone back for the next ones. For everyone tuned in, wherever you are, whether you're on LinkedIn Live, wherever you are tuning in from around the world, I know we're streaming everywhere at the moment. Thank you for joining us. And there's a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to send them all to you, to the panelists after as well. They're like, no, Chris, don't do that. Obviously, thank you to Brian and then the Safeguard Global team for helping us bring this together. It's been great to work with you guys on this, and we've still got 3 other amazing sessions. The next session is on Thursday, the 5th of November. If you're, as I mentioned on the top right-hand side of where you're watching now, if you hit the subscribe and follow button, you'll be notified next time we go live. And even if you can't join us live, because we appreciate you're busy, you've got kids running around, you can't always be there live, we'll send you the on-demand recordings immediately as well, so you'll never miss out. So make sure you hit that. And also, in the meantime, if you'd like to get a better understanding of Global Fluency, directly below the green button, if you hit that, you can hit that button, you can download the PDF now, which Brian and the team have kindly sent over to us. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. And thanks so much to all of you amazing panelists, as always, and I'll see you all again soon. See you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank